All right, welcome and good evening. So tonight I have a special program for you because this is based on my own true experience, which was one of the most thrilling and scary experiences I've ever had in my life. In fact, I almost didn't make it out. I took 2 trips and I almost didn't make it out on the second trip. I actually ended up in the hospital when I got back home. Wasn't the petroglyphs' fault, though. There's no curses here or anything. But the point I want to make is it took extreme effort to go see these things. Oh, yeah, okay. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah. And they are some of the most famous rock art pictograph sites in the world. They're a UNESCO heritage site, more than one site, actually, in Baja California, and they're all located in central Baja California. In case of those of you that are wondering, that should be just north of Loreto, which is a little town that has a nice airport. And there's been a lot of work now done on the rock art of Baja, but very little of it is published, at least in English. And okay.
Yeah, move it there, move it up and down.
Yeah. Well, that could be done too. Okay. There you go. Yeah, I like to look at what I'm talking about. Since I have no notes, it's all out of here. So, okay. So there are 4 areas of central Baja that contain the Great Mural rock art sites, and they're called Great Mural because they're pictographs, brightly colored pictographs, and the figures are often very large, even larger than life size, as you'll see, which makes them really unique. This map shows you that there's 4 areas that the Great Murals have been identified, and a lot of sites, obviously, you can see that. The most famous sites are in the Sierra San Francisco, which is right in the middle there. And I'm going to go there and show you several sites from there. In fact, about 8 or 9 sites. But I'm also going to show you a site from Guadalupe, Sierra de Guadalupe, because it's a really famous site and it has a lot of importance as far as the evolution of the rock art in this region. The 4 rock art areas I talked about are identified on this map here, and you can see the native linguistic territories so that we can identify those native tribes that may have been responsible for the rock art. One of the great mysteries of this rock art, though, and there are still several mysteries, is that when the Spanish came and settled in the 1700s, the Cochimi were there, occupying central Arizona, central Baja, and the Padres asked them about the rock art because they had seen it and it was very prominent. And the Cochimi said, "That's not ours. We didn't do that. We don't know anything about it. All we know is that we have rumors that giants in the past made it." And what's important about that little comment is not the giants part, because that's part of a lot of people's myths, but the fact that they claim they didn't make it. And they're the native peoples that lived there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So if they didn't make it, who were the people that did make it? Where are they now? And those questions have not been answered. But as you can see, if you can see, it's hard. Okay, where's my? Here we go. Here, this cutout here of the San Francisco shows you 3 main areas, and those are the 3 most well-known rock art areas. And I took mules into this one, and then also into this one. I've not done this. They say this is extremely difficult to get in, and my wife already is paranoid about me going down there. So I don't think I'm going to talk her into that one, but I have plenty to show because there's so much spectacular rock art in this area. There we go. Okay, so Harry Crosby, who's the known authority, spent a lot of time, I'll talk about him a little bit more later. He's identified 4 different rock art styles among the major rock art complexes down there. And the central characteristic of the San Francisco substyle, which is the most developed and most elaborate and detailed of all the rock art, are anthropomorphs, which they call monos. It's a Spanish term they use. And these anthropomorphs are really spectacular. They're the ones that can be quite large. They're also dressed strangely, if indeed that's dressed, or painted. And they have funny hats, and sometimes they have things standing above their shoulders, which are small animals turned upside down. Which immediately those of you that study shamanism would say, well, that's the familiars of a shaman. And so, you know, right away they give the impression that this is a ritual or religious rock art. But there are other ideas which I will talk about. And then as you can see, once you leave the San Francisco area, you start to go north, which will be ultimately going to Los Angeles. You have another style. It's called the red on granite, and you get the humans with the upraised arms, but you also then get humans with not upraised arms. And one of the interesting characteristics of the monos of the sub-San Francisco style is they all begin as outlines. So they create an outline of a figure, and then they fill it in with a design. It's much like we did as children when we drew, but what it does is it makes for very clean edges and very well-defined individuals. And then also there are women that are identified, and the one that's in the lower right, you can see the breasts typically spray out at the side. It's called double profile. And all the females that can be identified as such have breasts in exactly the same way. And studies of this particular style of rock art have argued that these things either represent ghosts, ancestors, or enemies. And so you get to decide yourself which you think these are as we go through these images. Because I have my idea, but I want you to come up with your own, because you're going to get to see lots of nice photos here. Okay, oddly enough, oddly because I consider myself a historian of rock art research, and I did not know this fellow, but I've subsequently learned Leon Dejou was a French industrial chemist for the major copper mine that still exists there at San Rosalia. And he was a really smart guy, and during his 3-year contract working on the mines, he saw a lot of the rock art, became fascinated by it, quit his job, went back to France, raised some money, and established his own rock art expedition among the rock art from 1893 to 1894, and wrote a book or a report in 1895 that I would tell you is probably as good as most of the things written today. It's really remarkable. He was a bright guy, and he took photographs. So a lot of these things that we see today, the first photograph taken was by this guy. So I just want to give him some credit for being one of those pioneers. One of the sites that he went to was San Borjitas, and from the outside it really doesn't look like much. The only thing I'll say is that this area right here is all painted. So that kind of tells you something's going on. And then once you look, right around the corner, you see it's figures that are painted on the ceiling that's then pouring out into the open space. And then when you get inside, you see it's a huge cavern in here, and it's quite big. And there's rock art all throughout it, and petroglyphs and artifacts. And here's a drawing that the first systematic study that was done by INA, that's the Mexican National Institute of History and Anthropology, and they because of Dujou's work, they were familiar with it, and so they sent a female artist who was actually an artist and an archaeologist. And they went out in 1951 and she drew this, which is really a spectacular drawing and very useful because you can't see that whole picture when you're in the cave. You only can see like a quarter of the actual panel. So it takes a lot of work to be able to create something like this. There's a couple of things I find very interesting. One is it's almost all monos, primarily, in other words, humans, with a few animals here. So here's an animal here. And then there's this one white, and all the rest are what they call bicolor, and they're split in half, the black and the red, wearing funny hats of all different kinds, could be headdresses. And at first people say this is just doesn't make any sense. It's just a bunch of stuff because it's a superpositioning of the rock art. And as more people study this, they think this actually is a design, and it has meaning in its jumbled nature. And even if something is put in on top of it, it's still part of the bigger picture, which we don't know yet what it is, but I'm going to give you some clues. So this is really valuable to us. And then Campbell Grant, who's a very famous rock art person, he went back in 1973 and redrew it. And there's some slight differences between the two paintings. One is he saw stuff down below. The one we saw quit here. So when you go down below, you start seeing these white-colored fish. Oops. And that's one of the things that really struck me about the rock art is there are a lot of fish designs in this rock art in the middle of the desert. Of course, the water is not that far away. You can see all the fish down there. And some of the fish, the species you can be identified. They're so well drawn. 2, 3 in a row and then a big one. But we'll talk about fish a little bit more later on. So they identify the monotypes. And one of the things that they say is that they think the earliest ones are what they call scarecrows. And there's identified in drawings by Crosby of 2 scarecrows, and they have the lines on them as the infill of the body. Keep in mind all these start as outlines and then they infill it. And here's a couple examples of those. And really, unfortunately, the light in here isn't good enough to see that there's a lot more colors than black and red going on here. This one, in fact, whoops. This one here is actually red and yellow. And you can see all the lines on the body, but again, the straight arm, so it's a good scarecrow. And then it's got his head up the crack, butt crack of this other individual here. And you start wondering, well, what are they doing? What's the meaning of these? And they're at different angles, although it's either up or down or sideways. And there are children in some of them. As you can see here, there's a mother with the breast, and then there's a child with her. And then here's some smaller figures here, probably another child. And the more you look at these things, you find out, oh my God, there's stuff everywhere. Here's an interesting character because it's a mono, and look at the claws on its feet, and then it's got genitalia. Now the San Francisco style does not normally have genitalia. So it's unusual. Well, it's interesting that the earliest mono panel, which they think this is, because they've got a radiocarbon date from it 7,500 years old. It's the oldest of the Great Mural panels, and therefore they think the Great Mural idea originated in the Guadalupe and then moved north into the San Francisco mountains. Now, I believe that those stripes represent the cactus that are so common there. You have the organ pipe, and then you have the cordon, or it's also called elephant cactus. And they have the typical ribs, and so it's, a guess that these figures are somehow related to the cactuses, which provide a lot of food and other resources for them. And okay, here's that one white person that I showed you earlier. It's right here. So different than everything else. God dang it. This hair trigger here. That's the drawing that was done, one of the drawings. And you can see that next to it, next to this figure, there's another one right here, hard to see here, but the painting shows you it's one that has infill of a checkerboard. So it's not the bicolor or one color, it's a checkerboard of multiple colors in the body. Again, you can see the outline and then the yellow and then the infill of the rectangles. So why are those two figures so different than all the rest of them? We have no idea. And then, you know, they say when you read the literature, what literature there is, that, you know, well, these monos are all very stiff and static and don't look like they're moving. But I found when you start to study them and look carefully, you see that they're not so static. For example, here's one, got the arms up, it's all red. But look, the legs are curved. He's sitting, like he's sitting on the edge of a creek, and then look what's going by his legs is a big fish. That's a petroglyph. So it's just an example that you can't be too stereotypical about characterizing these monos. And then what's really impressive, here's the one I just showed you. And when you look up, you can see, look at all the figures that are above it here, going right out to the edge of the sky. And this site is very well known because there's a lot of monos and a few animals that have arrows, either shot into them or laid over them. And there's a big debate about what that means. This particular individual here has at least 6 arrows in him in all directions. You can see these arrows, these black arrows coming into them. Sometimes the arrows even have the points identified on them. And so people say, well, is this a metaphorical death in the other world, or is it an actual death of an enemy in battle? So do you take it literally, or is this spiritual imagery? I personally take it as spiritual imagery for a lot of reasons, as you'll come to see here. And in this site, there's also a rock that's full of carved vulvas. And those of you that don't know what a vulva is, it's there might be somebody here. I know there's a lot of rock art people, so you've probably heard it. But for those of you who don't, it's a petroglyph symbol for vagina. So it's a very sexualized ritual symbol. But look how many of them there are. They're just all over the place. I don't have any idea what that means. And of course, what I find interesting is that it's carved on top of painted red designs. So it's probably a little later than the design work that's done. And then a boulder right outside the entryway is also full of carved vulvas too. So carved vulvas were a part of the inventory. And lots of interesting artifacts, choppers, matates, marine shell, a lot more marine shell than I expected, because we're about 43 miles at this site from Mulegé, and then Mulegé is just like a mile from the water. But what I really found interesting, having done the dike collection, those of you that are very familiar with the book that I wrote on the dike collection, you remember there's a section on carved wands, wooden wands. Here's one right here with a snake head. In fact, it looks very similar to one of the ones we had at the dike. There's no relation, but it's just interesting that these types of implements are being used as part of the ritual that's associated with the rock art. Okay, so now we're going to go down into the Sierra San Francisco. That site I just showed you can be reached by a high clearance vehicle and a stiff hike. Most of these other sites, in fact, all the other sites I'm going to show you today, there are no roads to them. You can only, and then look at this terrain. You can only get there, and what you're headed for to go down in that terrain is the water basins. These water basins fill in with the rainfall from the summer especially. And because of that, we think that the paintings were probably done in the fall when all the Tanahas were full of water and you didn't have to worry about water down there. And as you can see, they can get pretty big. Okay, in 1962, a very famous writer, Earl Stanley Gardner, who had been exploring Baja on his own just for years, decided to do an expedition to look at some of this rock art that he'd heard about. So he enlisted Clement Megan, who was a well-known UCLA anthropology professor, and the two of them went down, and he wrote an article in Life magazine, and that exposed these rock art sites to the world, that 1962 Life magazine article. By the way, if you don't know who Earl Stanley Gardner is, he's the guy that wrote all the Perry Mesa shows. Made a ton of money on it too, as you can imagine, but very famous person. And it's nice because he paid for the expedition to go down there. And Clement did also do some research that he published in American Antiquity a couple of years later. A lot of what we know, though, is from Harry Crosby, a journalist and adventurous. He spent 3 or 4 years riding a mule throughout the canyons, and then wrote a book that was last published in 1997. And if you don't have this book, try and get it on Amazon, because it's a wonderful, wonderful book, especially after you've seen it. And that's him down there in the blue shirt. Okay, and here's me going down into the canyon on mules, and I can tell you it was really an unusual experience. Unusual in that I'd never ridden a mule before. I was raised on horses in a ranch, so I was very familiar with riding animals, but mules are a little different. And of course you have to have your pack animals, because it's all primitive camping. There's no electricity, there's no running water. So you have to carry everything in. So for 6 people, it took 5 wranglers, 5 cowboys, and 13 burros. 13 burros, 5 cowboys to take 6 people on mules into the canyon. So it's a caravan. And there's lots of adventures on the way in, because burros like to be renegade. They like to decide, I'm done, I'm going up the side of the mountain. And this is when you get to see the cowboys really show their skills, because they go right up the side of the mountain and they lasso them. And yeah, I mean, they lasso them at a full run going up this hill. It's amazing. And they had them back in order, and we were back on trail probably within 10 minutes. I was quite impressed. I mean, these guys, of course, they live down there, and you know, they've done this all their life. So, okay, the first site I want to show you is San Gregorio. So that's in the San Gregorio Canyon area. Now, San Gregorio is the only canyon that actually connects to the Sea of Cortez. So you could, in theory, hike from the Sea of Cortez all the way up into the mountains and get here. Or you can do like I did and ride a mule for 7 hours and get there. And in fact, it might even have been more than 7 hours. 7.5 hours, that's exactly what it was. Oops. Come on. All right. Now, what's really spectacular about this site is that it's not only, you see the alcove, you know, the rock shelter is typically where they are, always where there's water. So wherever there's water down there, you know there's going to be rock art. And it comes, as you can see, it comes out of the flat shelter and then it just goes right up the face of the cliff. All that black and red you see there are animals and humans, very dense. And here's, for example, you can see here's 2, 3 of my trail mates, and then here's where it comes right out of the rock and goes right up to the side of the face. Okay, this person, you know, is probably, you know, over 6 foot, and look at this size of this. By the way, the humans can be up to 7 feet tall, and the deer can be up to 10 feet tall. So this is larger than life size, obviously, and then there's life size too. And then there's small things that are totally different. So it's tremendous variability. But if you were able to really look at this carefully, yeah, they had to have scaffolding to do some of this work. It's the only way. Or palm trees, because these are native palm trees that grow at the bottom in the Tinajas. And you can knock a palm tree down and use it like a ladder too, so that would be effective. So, but they had to have some means, because there are paintings that are as high as 30 feet above the floor. 30 feet.
Is that limestone or volcanic?
It's all volcanic. The entire mountain range is volcanic, but it's a conglomerate volcanic. So it's very rough. Here's a close-up to give you an idea. And it's just, I mean, it's so dense. You have to study these things for a while. Obviously, you see more deer here, red and black. But here's one of those monos right here with the arms up. Half black, half red. And then here's a giant bird. In fact, I would say the things that fascinated me most about all the images were the birds. And I'll show you some birds, because you don't see birds in rock art very often. Okay, this is lying on your back looking up at the ceiling. You could probably spend 2 or 3 hours there just trying to figure out how many creatures there are and what they are, and which was done first and then was added. But I want to point out a couple of things here. You have deer that are half black and half red, like the humans are. And then over here, these are actually these are turtles. There's sea turtles that occur. And then there's something else in here that I want you to see. Oh, here we go. See this right here? It's a snake. And snakes are very rare in the grand mineral rock art style. So to have one that's white, and then of course it's outlined in red, because it has to be outlined first. Also, if you look carefully, you can see that here this area is much bigger, and it's considered that this snake had just eaten it, and the prey was still in its stomach being digested. But look at this. And, I mean, and you get one deer is going down, one deer is going up. But what's interesting is the deer and the mountain sheep almost always have their mouths open, like this one here. It's very obvious. And usually their head's tilted slightly so you can see their horns. Again, you can just see the profusion of the rock art. And again, you get, oh man. All right, let's move on to this one. Okay, here's one of the birds that I was talking about. And what's interesting about the bird, it's like everything else, it's half black and half red. See that? And birds always are in flight. They're always flying. They always have their mouth open up to the sky. Okay, and then just 100 meters away, there's another site. And again, it's an alcove that you can use as shelter. And the figures are huge. And in fact, this whole rock here is all carved, like it's a giant vulva. It's almost like this is a, the Earth Mother or something, representing where the spirits live. And as you can see, they're coming out of the hole here. And then here's a rabbit, a red rabbit. The rabbits are very common, surprisingly. Okay, look at this. Okay, here's one of our wranglers. He was 10 years old when I made this trip with him. And he did all the work that every one of the other wranglers did too. Because he's raised on a ranch, that's all he knows. I mean, he doesn't go to school, he does ranch work. Although they now have satellite dishes, fortunately, for the kids to get educated. But here's a couple of things I want to talk about. One is, look at this creature here. Look how big that thing is. It's monstrous. What do you think that is? It's a whale. It's a whale in the middle of the stinking desert. And when I mean desert, the San Francisco mountains gets 3.9 inches a year. And say, here's a whale. Now they could walk, take a day's walk, and go to, go to the Sea of Cortez, and they would see this, and that's very likely what they did. But there's a couple of things about this whale that is a little bit strange. So let me go forward. All right. One thing I want to mention is that looks like a whale, looks like a whale, looks like a whale, but there's legs. It's got legs. But the legs are inside some kind of envelope here. See the black outline goes around, and then you have two legs coming down. And then, of course, right next to it is this person here, which is another mono. And with the arms raised up, with a whale over his head, and this giant mountain sheep above him here. So what they're telling you, okay, this is the power of a human, but this is the power of a whale and our mountain sheep. I do believe the size is a reflection of power. We went to a rock shelter site that was a habitation site, El Borrego Cave, and there was still artifacts lying all over the place, even though I was told that the University of Barcelona excavated it. They must have just said, oh, we got enough stuff now, leave the rest behind. But obsidian, it's all local obsidian. There's lots of obsidian sources in Baja. And shell, again, shell. And somebody studied the shell that's been found in the San Francisco Mountains, and they came to the conclusion that it's either containers, like this was probably a big pectin container, or tools. And this is a chopper, and this is a bivalve. Docinia is the species name. And so here you find these, scattered throughout these sites, and shows you that they're connected to the water. Okay, here's the rock art across the canyon from that, and again you can see, it's a delightful little panel here. You have a human standing on top of a quadruped with a whale over his head. Now, to me, it can't represent reality. This is a dream, I think, and I think a lot of the work that we're seeing is a dream work with spirits. Okay, let me just say a couple of things before I go on any further with my rock art. Is that all the surveys that have been done and all the eyes that were looking to the ground in my group, all 6 of us were archaeologists. There's never been a piece of pottery found at these sites. This is all hunter-gatherer rock art. And that's why it goes back so far, because it's been hunter-gatherers there. There's even been paleo points found in the San Francisco. So we know that Paleo-Indians were there using the obsidian. So it's all hunter-gatherer rock art. And so you have to imagine that they're developing special relationships with the animals they're hunting. Okay, here's a whole series of monos across here. And you can see, and then, oh man, this is a terrible little thing here. Okay, you can see that there's, on top of the deer, they're putting one of the humans is below the deer, under the deer, and one of them is above it. And so what's going on? Is that meaningful, whether you're in front of the deer or behind the deer? But I did want to point out also that, not on this slide, but the previous slide, maybe the next one here, yeah. And then you get these tall, much taller monos up here. So you got big tall ones, and these are still big. I mean, these are at least 4 feet tall. And then here's a whale, but a miniature whale, a small whale. So just when you think you got things figured out, they do something different on you. Here's 2 humans, 2 monos with their arms up, and then 2 whales above them. A red whale and a black whale. Okay, La Palma. La Palma has 3 different components to it, and it's It's a long, it's over 100 feet long, the panels. And they are, so they start at this end. There's a little cave here, and you can see how profuse just in that one area the drawings are. You can see here's the legs of a mono up here, and there's two black mountain sheep. You can't see them very well, but it's just so dense you can't even see the figures anymore. But not here, you know. So the question is, what did they like about that particular spot that kept drawing over and over on that spot? Datura was at most of the sites. Jimson weed, which is a powerful hallucinogenic that we know native people took, and so I believe that they probably were using the datura as part of the rituals of the rock art manufacturer. And then this arrow point, by the way, is very old. It's a gypsum point. It's at least 3,000 years old. I found a couple of gypsum points at the sites there. So this rock art it's got a good age to it. Okay, we talked about the whales and the shamans, and I love this one because you have the shaman here with the upraised arm and the funny little hat. They call them saw caps. But this one, he's red and black, but look, it's red up top, and it's like he's wearing a pair of black pants. And then behind him is a whale. And then here's another large, probably sea creature, perhaps a whale or even a turtle. So here you have an example of powerful sea creatures and a shaman who's obviously controlling those creatures. Okay, then you get to where it's not really understandable anymore, although if you look carefully you can start to see deer, bighorn sheep. It just shows you how dense it is. And then there's a row here of these individuals with the big deer above them, huge deer above them. In fact, it looks pregnant. And this is a beautiful row of 8 or more figures with one small one. It's called the family because there's also a female here. See the female with the breasts? And then you have the child holding the hands of this adult here. And so it may have represented a family, but of course, where? In this world? In another world? Okay, here's some sea turtles. Now, the sea turtles are probably green sea turtles, and there's some that have a ridge down their back that make them look like the leatherback turtles. And they're big because sea turtles are quite large. And we do know that the Chimi native people did eat sea turtles. It was a food, and there was also the Seri. Actually, one of their clans are sea turtles. So that was important imagery. And then here's the manta rays, and 1, 2, and this is one of the people of our group. And then when you look at them up close, here they are better. And then when you look at, this is a Piedras Pintas petroglyph site, which I also went to. I'm not going to talk about today. And it's huge, and it's part of that whole sequence. But you can see they identified 3 different stingrays. And ours looks probably like a manta ray because see the long tail, and then there's got the two antennae or whatever coming out of the top. So, we know that they were seeing these things in the ocean because a famous photographer took a photograph of a bunch of them in the Sea of Cortez, and you can imagine the effect this must have had on a native person to witness this and then to go back to their site in the mountains and then draw it. Really impressive. Okay, so that was the first canyon. The second canyon is Santa Teresa Canyon, and here gives you an idea of how rugged it is. We started not even on top of here, but like up here in another level, and down, 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 down. I think it took us 5 hours to get down to the bottom of this one. And I got a map here that shows you 4 of the sites we're going to talk about. There's actually 6 of them. And you can see how they're spread around the canyon, of course, near water, all of them. And the Cueva del Raton, which actually means the mouse, because the main figure here that's so famous was misidentified. It's actually a black mountain lion. It's not a mouse. You know, we can't see this panel. It's fading a bit, but here's more of a, you know, one of those monos. But this mono is really unusual because it's got a black face. So it's got a red head, and then its face area is black. And by the way, there are no facial features on any of the humans in any of these rock art sites. Now, why would you not have a facial feature to an anthropomorph? Well, maybe they're a ghost. Now, this is an odd site, I have to tell you. It's just one panel stuck back in this alcove up on the ceiling, and they call it La Musica. And the reason they call it La Musica, because it's several individuals with their arms up and their hands in certain hand positions on a scale. And so one of the archaeologists argued that that's the pandemic scale, and that the finger poses are representing different notes. Now, this is mind-boggling for me to think about. Paleo-Indians or archaic people are not only musical, but they can depict that musical in rock art. Now, it may be that, you know, this is total bullshit, but it's a very interesting idea, actually, and the Aina is very, very good quality professionalism. So they must have had some ideas. I will tell you, though, I found out they made a mistake. This is a sign right here. It's a sign they made that goes in front. There's a sign down here. Oh, damn it. Okay, and the sign tells you the story, and then the drawing. They reversed the image. Somebody accidentally reversed the image. So if you notice that, they're too close together here. It's really a terrible design. Notice how this guy at this edge, he's got his arms up, pointing here. Well, where is he? He's over here on this one. You know how printers, sometimes they accidentally reverse an image? Well, they did, and nobody caught it. So, but it's really unusual. I've never seen anything like this before. And I mean, you have to admit, even the human figures are totally different than everything else we've seen. Now, this, to me, I could say, now, those are humans. They're not spirits. They're not ghosts. They're humans. Okay, and then there's another site called Cueva Las Flechas, and it was called that because there are some individuals with arrows in them. And what's I find interesting is the guy that's got the arrows in him here. Well, he's got one black arrow coming down to his neck, but there's also his spirit animals are on his shoulder here, one here and one here. And then there's some kind of animal right here. It looks like it's crawling up its leg. Yeah, in fact, then you get a whole series of animals that are much tinier here. So I think, in my mind, this is the real world down here, and this is the size of the living things that are in the real world, and then you get the spirit world, and that's why they're so huge and so dramatic and have these unique characteristics about them. This was an interesting headdress here, too. It's got, you know, it's like ears flapped over and then a stick sticking straight up on the head. And then this one has got ears here and then 3 sticks sticking out of the head. Maybe they're feathers, you know. And one that's just a black head, yes. Okay. And here's a very large deer, and there's also on top of the deer is one of these big birds. See all the wings? The body and the head, the mouth open, facing upwards. Yeah, so this bird is overlaying. This bird to me reminds me of condors. You know, large raptures. And which would be a powerful bird. It'd be a powerful image for somebody that's, putting powerful images of the spirit world up. And then here's a mountain sheep that's got black and red body and then black and red horns. And then a mono or a human on top of them right here. Look how much smaller this human is than this mountain sheep. To me, that's saying something. That's not random. You can make somebody look big too, the same size, unless you do that on purpose. And then here at the same site, here's a series of the monos. They call this the three wise men here. And they're really elaborate infill here. Look at this. It's almost like there's spirals as part of the infill of the clothing. And this is different totally than this. I mean, this is standard black and white, but then you get something like this. And look here, this guy has 3 fingers. This guy has 4 fingers. Has 4 fingers here. And then there's a whole series of like five or more crammed together of these spirit-like creatures there. When you get close up, some of them don't even make any sense. They've lost their bodies, and now they're just these long lines, just like I would envision a ghost, Look at this guy's hand. Does that look like a spooky hand to you? Or does that look like something out of Freddy Krueger movie? Okay, and then La Pintada. This is the most famous cave of all, so it's my last site. And again, you can just see how rugged it is down there. And this slide here, I'm in the rock shelter here, looking out back. There's a big Tanaha here. And they actually built a walkway because too many people were falling off the side of the cliff trying to look at the rock art, because when you look at it, I mean, this is all the rock art, and it's not all of it. This is only some of it right here, and right to the edge. And this is the edge of the cliff. And so that was a very smart thing. And they reminded us that, by the way, all of those materials were brought in by mule. The concrete, the wood, the rails, everything was brought in by mules. So let's see what it's all about. This rock art site. Look at this. Oh, God, it's just unbelievable. And look at the birds there, yeah, but look at the size of the animals. And to me, there's motion in that picture. That's just really dynamic. I would not call that a static. Here you can see those 2 birds there. This deer, by the way, is different than ones we've seen, like this a red body and black body. This one has got a black outline and then a yellow infill, which is very rare, although we do find the color yellow in other. Okay, here's a close-up of those birds. I mean, don't they look, I don't know what they look like, but they look like something I'd see in a dream myself. They're really spooky-looking stuff. Condors is what I think they are, yeah. Now look at this. I read something that said it just doesn't make any sense, and it's just, it's just erratic. But if you stare at this, there's some interesting details I'd like to point out. First of all, this isn't static by any means. There's 5 figures right here, and they're all leaning in this direction. They're leaning. See the legs? Their whole body. This is a motion pose. These are all pushing this way. It's like there's an energy force in the middle here, and they're pushing against it. And then this side, they're pushing this way. And then you have this really big mono here, bigger than all the rest, with upraised arms, and he's looking over here. But he's also pushing back this way. And then, if you look very carefully, you'll see that there's actually petroglyphs that have been pecked over the figures. Here's one. And notice how it's also leaning into the middle here where all the energy is. And there's a couple over here leaning this way too. So to me, I don't see this as a random, just years of painting. I think there's a composition here that's probably been altered through the centuries, but it's a composition. And here, to lengthen out this panel here, you can see that this big anthropomorph, he's down here looking at all these mountain sheep and these other monos here. So he's pushing against this, they're pushing against this, holding back this energy, and then you have a whole set of other creatures here. Really dynamic set. And by the way, that is the sky there, and as you'll notice that I'm upside down, and it's the only way to see it. And it really also gives you a distorted sense of space, that you have to get on your back and look up, and then, you know, the sky is not right, and it really gives you a sense that it's not of this world. Here's another one. Again, very busy. What I like about it is this black rabbit, beautifully rendered rabbit here. And then here's a strange pose of another creature. It looks almost hard to say what it is, really. But here's some birds. I want to show these birds up close. First of all, you've got a lot of stuff going on in here, and there's a white arrow coming from the belly of this big deer going down, and you can see it's got a big point on the end of it. So what is that doing? Well, that is going right into this bird. And you can see one bird is red and black, but started out as a white outline. The other one was pure black, and then they just made another one on top of it that's white. So you see the white one on top of the black one here? But again, they're always in flight. And of course, here's one of the monos here, always associated with these powerful individuals. Here's a close-up. White outline to that, actually. And here, okay. This reminds me of things I've seen in my dreams. I'll share that with you. So you can see why I had to go see this rock art. I mean, it was calling to me for years. And this year, as I was turning 70, I said, I got to do it now. You know, I got to go do it now. And this one's fascinating because it just looks like a whole bunch of anthropomorphs that are layered, super layered, and almost to me looks like a bunch of ghosts, you know, where you see through. And I'm trying to envision that the artist was depicting creatures and humans that you see, but you see through to what's behind them as well. And that's what the dream world would be like, you know, or the other worlds. And then this is the most spectacular panel, one of the most spectacular panels in all of the Baja, and it's really, really well executed. The artist was just we call this the Michelangelo of the San Francisco rock art, because it's just everything is so crisp and colorful and has a little bit of energy to it. And here's the one edge, and you can see that, you know, a lot of this typical monos, the humans that we saw, bicolor. Look at, here's a little dog over here, coyote, probably coyote here. You know, here's a row of those monos again. Looks like 5 of them here. And again, this is not unusual, where the deer are always going up, like they're climbing up, going somewhere, and their mouths are open again. There are some deer that have arrows in them. Here's one right here. And somebody did a study, and they said they don't think that more than 25% of the animals have arrows in them. So it's not a common thing, but it does occur. And you know, again, the variety is interesting. This deer, of course, starts with the outline, but then the lower half is got dots, sort of splotched, and then the upper half are lines, parallel lines. Totally different than any of the other deer that you can see. So that's really unusual. Oh man, this stuff, I could look at this stuff all day. Okay, here you have some more of these really, I mean, God, they look just like ghosts or spirits to me. Really, but lots of layers again. You can see here's the big deer that's underneath these two. But notice it's under them, but you can still see it. Again, they're designing this so you can see through, you know, the spirits, because that's how they are. Okay, and that's my presentation, but I'll be glad to answer any questions that anybody has.